Hey guys, it's Sig. Welcome back to another video. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe and turn on notifications so that you can see the next time that we upload. We have a very incoming video that a lot of people have requested. It is going to be the first in a short series on a certain response to the logical problem of the Trinity that I recently streamed with Professor Chris Tweet. Links to his stuff will be down in the description below. And without further ado, we begin. It's just that my chat wants to be devious. My chat wants to be devious today, but we will not have it. This is the problem. But guys, again, guy to my right. Okay, well, no, guy to my right. His name's Christopher Tweet. Very nice guy, very humble guy for some reason, but he should be basking in his pride right now. He is a Protestant Christian, very nice, wonderful chap, and he writes probably one of the most incredible papers that I've seen in a very long time on the Trinity. And so that's actually what's going to be talked about today. So Chris, would you like to just give us a summary of what the paper is actually about and what's the title of your paper so that people can try and see and search for it?
Yeah, sure. I've actually got it right here, so I'll show it.
You got the you got the paper there. Wait, hold on. What? Could you put the title on the screen? Wait, what's the title? Right.
Absolute identity in the.
Incredible. 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 Wow. So what was the general paper about? So you obviously it took you some time to write the paper and get the stuff together and stuff, and you kind of dipped into things that you were really interested in, and then you dipped into things that you were not as interested in with those other things, but it all came and blended together rather nicely, if I say so myself. So what would you summarize your paper as being about, apart from just what the title says?
Well, in short, the Trinity is really hard. So the Christian idea of the Trinity, or at least the Orthodox idea, is that there's one God.
Yeah.
But also there are these divine persons, the Father and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, very true.
And each of them, and they're distinct from one another.
That's true.
So then, I mean, you might just think, okay, cool, and just be unreflective about it. But I mean, if there's the Father who's God, and the Son who's God, and the Holy Spirit who's God, and they're all distinct, you might think there's three gods. But remember, there's only supposed to be one God, right?
Right.
So it creates this problem. And so, I mean, you might think, well, what are these things? So we've got one God and we've got three persons.
Yeah.
You might the three persons are really just like names of God, different names.
Yeah.
So they're distinct their names.
Mm.
So just like I might be Chris, I might be Dr. Tweet, and I might be Dad.
True. Very true.
Right.
You seem to be cutting out a bit. Maybe move closer to whatever mic you're using. Are you using like a laptop PC or using like a phone?
Laptop. Yeah. Is this okay?
Yeah. I mean, it's okay now. It just keeps cutting a bit in and out. I don't know why. Does that usually happen when you are online or?
No.
Oh.
Is that better?
Yeah, it's actually better now. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
You're black here, right?
Yeah, there's a bit of a lag. I don't know why there is a bit of a lag though. That makes no sense to me. Hold on. Maybe it might be. It might well be just because I have some stuff up online. Okay. All right, try now.
How about this?
Yeah, that's completely fine. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Yeah. Thank you. So, sorry for interrupting you. As you were saying.
Yeah. So you might want to know what to do about the one God but three persons. You might think they're different names, just like I have like different names that people call me. But that's a heresy.
Yeah. True. So modalism, yeah.
You might think they're just different roles that I play. So like there's one Chris, but there's like different roles. There's the role of professor and the role of dad and maybe the role of husband. But we can't think that about the persons of the Trinity. That's a heresy. That's still modalism.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you might think they're different stages, just like infant, toddler, and teenager are different stages of the same person. So the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit stages
Mm.
of the same God.
Now that's
That's a
interesting as
heresy.
well, because one of those heresies, if I remember, is a heresy called Sabellianism. So
Yeah,
yeah, people like Sibelius, he was like, well, maybe the son is just like when the father became incarnate, and that's pretty much it. So there's
yeah,
probably heresies that link to that.
yeah. So, so the problem here is that all of these, so the heresies associated with this strategy, um, also you have to maintain the distinctness of the three persons. And
Mm,
it's not distinct enough. You don't have three distinct persons just by there
mm.
being roles or names or stages or something like that. So there needs to be three distinct persons.
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense.
You're like,
So,
okay, all right, we've got the three distinct persons.
mm,
How do we get to the fact that there's one God, given that there's the distinctness of the persons?
mm-hmm,
And the here is to think of being God as being something like a collective name. So you
mm,
might think like there's one mob, but there are multiple people in the mob,
mm,
or three people in the mob.
mm-hmm.
Well, God isn't like a mob, right?
Yeah, of course not. No, no. You could be like the mafia though, maybe, you know.
God is supposed to be an individual. That's the idea.
Right.
God
Right,
can't
right, right.
be collective.
Mm,
And if God were something like that, then you might think, okay, well, then there's three individual persons, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit,
mm,
and each of them are God. So you may think of like God as like a kind, like human. Like I'm a
mm.
human, Big is a human, and I don't know, my wife is a human. Like we're all human.
Right, right.
Um, and but then you've got three humans.
And we don't want three
So
gods, obviously.
you have three gods. That's tritheism. So that's a heresy.
Right.
So now, like Trinitarians are stuck, right?
Yeah.
Like what how do we make sense of this doctrine?
Honestly.
Yeah, and I try to solve the problem in the
Mm,
paper. That's the problem that I try to solve. I try to make it so that we can maintain the distinctness of the three persons. Each of the persons is identical to the one God,
mm,
but they're still persons and there's still one God.
mm. And just to correct you, not to correct you, sorry, just to touch on that as well. When you say that they are identical, what sort of identity are we like working with here? Because in the paper, and I found this really, really interesting, you talk about the fact that you are absolutely not trying to propose a different way of counting. You're not trying to argue for some relative notion of identity per se, but actually you're trying to employ absolute or classical identity when you're trying to encounter this problem. So,
Yeah, that's exactly. It's absolute classical identity,
mm,
which seems a little odd, but so some people have tried to. Uh, you're black, right? So the opponent's white and they scored.
right,
You know?
yeah. That's me, yeah. Right. I'm the white. I'm white, so I'm in the red. I'm white, as you can see. I'm moving the player around like that.
So
But
congratulations
yeah, that's me.
on your goal then.
Yeah. So I just scored. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good.
So
I didn't. What I'm watching, man. All
yeah, you're
right.
actually watching the game. Okay, this is more pressure. Now I actually have to win. Now I actually have to win. So okay. So back to the actual. So back to the conversation. Apart from this, you're saying that obviously, like, because this is like in the first like 5 or 6 pages of the paper, you basically just go through all of these statements of ways that people have tried to, figure out counting either by sordality or otherwise, or try to promote, in the impure view, like numerical sameness without identity, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So some
what
attempts to solve the problem are to
mm,
think that there is no thing as absolute identity, or that absolute
right.
identity is the way that we count.
Mm,
So what you need to something like the the Father is the same God as God, but Father is the same. Yeah, goal. Good job. The Father is the Son is the same God as God, and the Holy
mm,
Spirit is the same God as God.
yeah.
But when we're talking about the Father and the Son,
Mm,
the Father is the same God as the Son, but the
right.
Father is not the same person as the Son.
I
So
see.
instead of talking about like just the is statements, you have to say is the same blank as.
Right. Because it's relativized, right? So you're relativizing identity. But like, do you not think that that kind of just falls into just, qualitative identity? You're just basically saying that he has this God quality the same, but they don't have this person quality the same. Like, how do we, like, does that not just lead into the same issue of just saying it is a predication? Or,
It's not the same thing as saying is a predication. It's saying
mm,
it really is, like you count it the same number as, right? And
mm,
so relativized to a quality or to a sortal, as they say. A sortal is just like a term that indicates a kind. So
mm.
it's counting sortals and it's identifying things based on their sortal. And so
Right. Makes sense.
there is actual identity, but
Mm,
um, all the identity is relative to that sortal.
I see. I
And if
see.
you then you like, so really the problems have to do with these identity statements, if
Mm,
they really are identity statements, right?
right.
So the Father is God and the Son is God. And if
Mm,
they're really to each other, things that are identical to the same are identical to each other, right?
mm,
So
mm.
if the Father, and I don't know if this is transferring over well to the stream, but like the
It's doing
Father
good. You're
is
okay. You're great. You're great.
God, right? And so
Mhm.
you can think of those like being placeholders that
Mm.
flank the identity, right? So the Father's identity,
Oh,
and so
right.
you can think of them as collapsing into each other, right? So the Father is identical to God. The Father is just the same thing as God. And then when you have the Son is identical to God, you can think of like the Son is collapsing into God. So the Son is the same thing of God as God.
Mm.
And then when God is identical to God, they collapse. So they're identical, right? So the Father is identical to the Son. So you can think like this collapsing is really all
Right.
the results of
From the sordals,
inference.
right? From sortals, right?
Yeah, inference that we're making that has to do with identity and transitivity, really. So
Mm.
transitivity is like the kind of collapsing
Mm.
that I just described.
Right. Interesting. And it's interesting how like the Aristotelian tradition picks up on like relativity as well when it comes to identity, just like a smaller side. So like Aristotle in his prior analytics tries to talk about transitivity, but then he says this weird quote at the end where he says that it must be that A should be said of everything that C should be said of, except for A itself. So even then, there seems to be some Aristotelian precedent for the thing that you try to do in your paper as well, like at least semantically speaking, right? And so you lead on in your paper, and I think this is really fantastic. I have a quote up here if you just allow me to read from the quote. You say that I don't know if it's actually coming up on stream. Hopefully not. It is. Okay, so we're gonna have to go back onto StreamYard to make sure that it does not do that. Okay, we do not want that to happen. No, absolutely not. But in the paper, I actually have the link to the paper up down here on my mobile device. You actually talk about the fact that when you talk about identity with the Father, you give the example of something known as an opaque context, which is something that we see in like semantics and semiotics. Would you like to talk about that a bit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this collapsing that I talked about, it's
Mm,
basically substituting. Right? We're substituting the Father for God
mm,
into the statement the Son is God, right? So the Father
right.
then like folds into or collapses into God, which then collapses into the statement about the Son. So we've
Mm,
got the Father, and that's
right.
and and like the Trinitarians, Orthodox Trinitarians, want these statements to be true,
Mm,
that ideally absolute with absolute identity, that the Father
right.
is God,
Yeah.
but they don't want it to be true that the Father is identical to the Son. So
Right.
to prevent this problem is to maintain that the statements are true, but
Mm,
then to think that the inferences or the substituting that can be done on the basis of these statements
mm.
doesn't always lead to these conclusions that create problems for Trinitarians. So
Right. That's interesting.
yeah, so
So then,
what I
how
do
do
in the
you?
paper is yeah,
Yeah,
go
no.
ahead.
Sorry, continue. Continue. No, continue.
So what I do in the paper is talk about when these substitutions are allowable and when they're not.
Right. Okay.
You can always try to substitute things. The question is whether you can make conclusions on the basis of it. And so I do that sometimes you can and sometimes you can't.
Right.
And in the vast majority, if you've got two identity statements, you can do that substituting and come to a conclusion on the basis of it. Like A is identical to C is identical to B, so A is identical to C. That is true in the vast majority of cases. But there's some cases in which there are what are called opaque contexts that prevent that move from happening.
Right. So the transitivity doesn't like carry over in this case because of the opaque context.
Well, transitivity is always going to be a legitimate inference rule. The question is whether you can apply it in a particular case.
Right.
And
okay.
In some cases in which there are opaque contexts is what they're called. So you can think of, so remember I talked about these like placeholders that flank the identity?
Yeah.
You can think of opaque context as being like clouds over the particular place.
Right, okay.
That might hold in, like
Makes
sometimes
sense.
the spatial thinking really helps my students when I talk about this sort of thing. So I'm doing it here. Think of them as like stayed over it. And so whenever you substitute into that cloudy area, you can't expect the conclusion to follow. That would follow if the cloudy area weren't there.
Makes sense. Right. So could you give like an example outside of like the Trinity for just an opaque context in general? Could you give an example of one?
Yeah. And I promise, chat, we did not preset these questions.
We did not. Okay, listen, and let me pause it. I guarantee you that we did not go over this before. We got on call like 15 minutes ago and we were just trying to work out the stream. The only reason I'm asking the question this way so you guys can actually like delve into the mind of like what's going on in the paper. I swear to you. Okay. Like I don't know how I can prove this. Okay. I'm playing FIFA whilst I'm talking to this guy. Like, he's great, honestly, and the way that he's explaining them is as if he's like heard these questions like millions of times before. But we appreciate you. We appreciate you so much, honestly. So again, is there an example of just like Amen. Yes. Is there an example? Is there an example of opaque context? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So for example, Lois Lane Lois Lane believes that she loves Superman.
Yeah.
Right. That's Lois Lane believes that she loves Superman. Clark Kent is Superman. Like they're the same person. So they're identical. Clark Kent is identical to Superman. So now take that statement, Lois Lane believes that she loves Superman, and also do the substitution into Superman, the phrase Superman.
Right, you get them together.
Yeah, when we try to do that, we get the result that Lois believes that she loves Clark Kent.
Clark Kent, right. But obviously that doesn't follow because she doesn't actually like Clark Kent in the series, right?
That's right.
Right.
It really doesn't follow. So we've got two true statements. Lois Lane believes that she loves Superman. Clark Kent is identical to Superman. We do that substituting that we would expect to be able to do because of the identity sign. And then we get a false statement.
Right.
That Lois Lane believes that she loves Clark Kent. And something there that makes it so we can't do that substituting. We've got two true statements. You'd expect that any inference rule, like substituting, co-referring terms like Clark Kent and Superman, you think that being able to substitute those co-referring terms into this statement that Lois Lane believes that she loves Superman would give a true conclusion, but it doesn't.
Doesn't, no.
The reason is that there are opaque contexts present.
Okay.
So the opaque context here is around belief or after beliefs. Lois Lane believes that she loves Superman.
Right.
So
makes sense.
there that creates this opaque context, that substituting the co-referring terms, Superman and Clark Kent, into that yields a conclusion that's false. We can't assume that substituting is going to yield a true value.
Right. So, okay, cool. That's fine. And like you're explaining, obviously, an opaque context would like yield the conclusion that we can't apply the transitivity inference rule this time. But what like I'm still kind of a bit like shaky because I happened to read the paper obviously, and you go on to talk about it later. But like, what really is an opaque context? And a further question would be, how can we be sure that opaque contexts do not violate transitivity?
Right. So first of all, what does brazy mean? Does it mean
brazy?
Does it mean
So like, so I'm so brazy is just so brazy is just a name for like, if someone says, oh, you're brazy or you're moving brazy in the UK, it just means you're moving a bit let's say a bit out there, not in any bad sense, just like a wild person, like a life of the party kind of guy. Has nothing to do
if you guys are, if chat's making fun of me, I'm not going to be offended or anything. I just wanted to know what it meant.
No, that's the name he calls himself. He calls himself Brazy B1. He thinks that he's funny, but he's not. You're not hilarious, B1. Okay, listen, mods, ban him. No, I'm kidding. Leave him. But no, but it's just the nickname that he calls himself. He thinks he's the guy. He's not really that guy. You know those university students that they walk into the place thinking that they're all hot shots and stuff. Yeah, that's what Brazy means basically. Yeah. So I think he's doing it to mock me. But Chris, as you can see, chat is saying that they rock with you. Okay, they love you. Okay, you're completely fine. But as we were saying, okay, so obviously we'll talk about opaque context and stuff and how we can identify them. But what is an opaque context? Number one. Yeah.
Yeah. So opaque contexts are only those areas.
Right.
Or areas that if we substitute co-referring terms into it, we should not expect the truth value of that sentence to be preserved. That's all it means. We've got Lois Lane believes that she loves Clark Kent. That's true. And now if we substitute the co-referring term into it, we should not expect that the resulting sentence, Lois Lane believes that she loves Clark Kent, for example, is true.
That's true.
There's some cases in which it is. So like Lois Lane believes that she loves Superman. It is true that Superman is identical to the superhero with an S on his cape.
Right.
That Lois Lane believes that, it is also true that Lois Lane believes that she loves a superhero with an S on his cape. But the idea is that substituting co-referring terms there, like in the middle, the co-referring terms, into that context, that opaque context, does not always guarantee that the resulting sentence has the same truth value as the one that's substituted into.
Okay, that's actually really interesting. So not only do you talk, and this is what I found was like actually so intuitive with the paper, and obviously it has to be something that's done because the first objection that, let's say, a person that's in these conversations is objecting to the logicality of the Trinity or just like objecting to Christian theism in general will be that we're kind of being a bit ad hoc, and B, we're being very confusing on when we're employing this whole opaque context language, right? So what kind of opaque, how do we distinguish when in God statements in general that we're using an opaque context here, and then in just other statements we can use transitivity just fine and we won't violate identity or anything of that nature? Like how do you know?
Yeah, well, it is really hard to tell how to identify where an opaque context is. How do you figure that out? Well, the answer is that when people had statements like Lois Lane believes something, and then we substitute into it, realize that the resulting statement doesn't have the same truth value as the statement substituted. and like we believe that identity follows transitivity. You know, if A is identical to B and B is identical to C, then A is
Mm.
identical to C. So we believe transitivity, but it doesn't seem to always work that substituting co-referring terms into some context yields the
Mm.
same truth value.
Mm.
And so open contexts are like just that mechanism that was invented in order to try to explain how we can have co-referring terms that can be substituted but not preserve the same truth value.
Okay,
It's
that's interesting. That's actually pretty fair. So when it comes to,
just,
because yeah, because there's nothing else we could do. There's nothing else you could do. You know, they're scoring on me, but you know, we're sacrificing the game to really talk about these issues. That's what's important. Okay, that's what's going on. But when you talk about, so in the paper, you end up starting to talk about the way that you would do it in the context of Trinitarianism. So in relation to classical Trinitarianism, you say that there's a difference between PIDs and then PUDs, and this is, and I remember the term as like person indicating uh permanence. Hold on, no, that's actually incorrect. Hold on, let me actually pull it up. Um, I got it right here. I swear, I got it right here. Pardon? What did you?
person involved description.
Right, person
Yeah.
involved descriptions, right, and then you say person uninvolved descriptions. And I think that's a really
Yeah.
useful category when we do talk about these, because quick aside, just to talk about a bit of history for a bit, understand like bishops like the Cappadocian Fathers, Gregory of Nyssa, in his work on the Orthodox faith and the Creed, what he talks about is the fact that he makes Christianity as a sort of middle way between the Jews of his time and then the Greeks of his time, right? He says that, oh, thank you so much, man, for messaging in the chat. He says, for example, that he says, okay, against the Jews, right? With the Jews, we have the unity of the essence. And then with the Greeks, you have the distinction of the persons. But then what he says is he inverts them and says, against the Jews, we have the distinctions of the persons. So against them, we have the distinction of the person. So when we talk about the Jews, we talk about God. We talk about God as the three persons. This is why, like in the 2nd century, a lot of the debate will be about trying to affirm the distinction of the persons in a very radical sense, because the debates and discussions were around Jewish people and so on, which makes sense contextually with what Gregory of Nyssa is saying. He then says, but with the Greeks, we're trying to preserve the unity of the essence, as he likes to call it. And so there seems to be even a historical idea of PIDs and PUDs, if not explicitly talked about, very much contextually derived very easily from the statements of these dogmatic people. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there's so like once we get past the linguistics, right? So
Mm,
I talk about arguments and the opaque context that presents substituting, and so you can't come to these conclusions.
mm, mm, mm,
Later
mm,
on, I say, okay, that's the linguistics. Now it's time to talk about like what there is in reality
mm.
that would explain why there are opaque contexts in the place that they are.
Yeah.
And when I do that, basically I talk about the special quality of persons that makes
Okay.
it so that there's a context associated with them. And that
Mm.
special quality, there's something about the divine persons that make it so that they have this special basis or ground. Like
Right.
I use Aquinas for this. So Aquinas says that persons are individuals with a rational nature.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Like relations. Right.
what it means to be an individual is to be somehow distinct from another. Like persons, like the individual part of personhood, is to be relationally distinct, and to be distinct is to, in a way, be opposed to another. Like there's an opposition between us. If there were no opposition, we'd be the same
The same
entirely,
thing.
right? So yeah, separation or opposition.
Mm.
And how do you explain the opposition? And I say, well, it's like the nature of a person to be relationally opposed to other persons in a way, not
Right.
relationally emotionally angry or angsty or anything like that. Like
Right,
the
right.
nature of the person, each individual and a distinct from other persons. And so there's something that is the basis for personhood that
Mm.
grounds opposition to another person.
Okay, right. And so in this context, for example, when it comes to like the relations, obviously Aquinas spends a long time trying to figure that out. There's like an entire section in the Summa where he just dedicates to proving procession in God, and he does it by way of perfection in emanation. So he takes this emanationist theory. He says that the higher you go in the great chain of being, the more closer the procession would be to the thing that it's proceeding from, and so on and so on and so on, until you get to God, where you just have relations. You just have relations in God, and that's it. You know, that's what we got. That's what we got. So you take that idea, obviously, right, of like what a relation is, a relation of opposition, and then you try to sort of like take the language of PUDs and then insert it with these persons and see like how that sort of like works out. So do you not think though that
Yeah.
like, you know, like obviously this sounds great for like the Christian, the Trinitarian is like whooping and hollering like, yes, okay, great, we got this identity stuff, but like does this not just seem a bit ad hoc, like you're just like kind of assuming a bunch of stuff? Like it is, you admit that in your paper, you say it's ad hoc. Like how do you respond to that? What's going on there? You know?
Yeah, it's really ad hoc, right? So ad hoc just means after the fact.
Right,
So,
right, right, right.
models of the Trinity where you take something that we're familiar with, and then you learn something about it, and then you apply that to the Trinity in order to explain how you can solve these problems with the Trinity, maintain the distinctness of the three persons and the unity of the divine nature. And so it's like it starts with the model. It starts with something we're familiar with. I don't think Aquinas was doing that. I don't think Aquinas was interested in that. Right? Aquinas wasn't interested. In some cases, we can try to find things that we're familiar with and related to God.
Right.
You know, we can like love for our neighbor, and we can then extrapolate that to love for God. We can talk about what it means to be infinite versus what is finite, and so like oppose it. You can think about what it looks like, and then figure out that it doesn't apply to God, for example. So like
makes sense, yeah.
Aquinas has where he tries to figure it out from what we're familiar with. Something like the Trinity is a special theology. It's revealed to us in statements, and it's supposed to be the sort of thing that we would never figure it out on our own. We'd never figure out that there are three persons in the Godhead.
Right. Of course not.
Like this is revealed, and then so we've got all these statements that are specially revealed, and you might, I mean, you might think there's something that we know about that we can apply to help understand it. That's possible. You also might think this is something that's just ineffable. And so what we need to do is figure out how we deal with these sorts of things without embracing contradiction.
Right. And like that's probably the more important thing. Like we're more concerned with just like whether the Trinity is contradictory or not, rather than, oh, can I be a smarty pants and just like explain every single thing about the Trinity in like great scientific detail and stuff. Like no, we care about whether it's a contradiction or not, right? But then would there not be an objection by, and I think this specifically by people in the skeptic tradition, people that will say, well, if you're just trying to work on it not being contradictory, but you're not going to tell me what it is, like, is that not a non-cognitive statement? Is this not non-cognitive information? Why is it not ultimately just meaningless if it's just non-contradictory? Or is there something that we can still garner?
Yeah, let's talk about Aquinas here, because this work was inspired by Aquinas. Really, I took a couple of graduate seminars. I was familiar with the problems associated with the Trinity, and I was familiar with some solutions.
Nice.
And I took a graduate on Aquinas on the Trinity and the Incarnation, and so we read a whole bunch and we delved into it and tried to figure out what was going on there. And Aquinas really seems slippery in a lot of cases. Like, you read him and you're like, you know, I can't figure out what's going on in the Trinity. Like basically, all you're doing is giving these objections and then showing how they all fail.
Yeah.
But you're not explaining then that the objections fail. So I tried to figure out what is this that's behind what Aquinas is thinking. And so like, hold on one second.
Yeah. So wait, he just left. Wait. No, he's back, guys. He's coming back. Just to add to that, right? Oh wow. Okay. Yes. I have them. I have these. Yes.
Yeah. And so, like, he tries to establish God's existence here, right? He talks about creation, he talks about divine providence, and
Yeah.
like 4 is on salvation and the Trinity and the incarnation. And this is supposed to be a work addressed specifically to Muslims. And he uses Muslim philosophers
like
works,
Avicenna and Averroes and right.
God's existence here, but he doesn't pretend like it. So Muslims do not accept the doctrine of the Trinity.
Obviously, right.
And so, nor do they accept the incarnation of God. They don't accept that Jesus is God.
Yeah,
and
right.
Expect that if Aquinas thought that you could take stuff that we're familiar with and use it to try to prove those things, or even give some idea about what's going on there, that he would do it in book 4, but he doesn't. Instead, all he is show that any sort of argument that you can make that would yield a contradiction with Christian doctrine is not going to work.
Right.
That's all he does.
Right.
Entirely, there's like nothing positive in establishing that, that it doesn't fail. And he says, look, suppose you're led to believe the truth of Christianity.
Right.
Okay, where are the contradictions? Show me.
But there isn't.
Contradictions are. So someone might, right, and they might think, what reason do I have to believe the Trinity? That according to Aquinas, the Christian says the only reason you would have to believe the Trinity is if you had reason to believe that Christianity is true for some other reason.
That is beautiful.
It's about the Trinity are true, and then you believe them, and all you need to show is that they're not contradictory. You believe them on authority of Christian testimony.
Right. And that's an interesting point as well, because you do raise that in the paper that you're more concerned with just dispelling contradiction than actually trying to give like some positive information on the Trinity. But actually, I think in my reading of your paper, in doing so, you actually do give positive information about the Trinity. Insofar as it's not contradictory, at least in Aquinas' metaphysics, he talks about this in the De Potentia. He then talks about this in the De Veritate. He talks about disputed questions of truth. He talks about the fact that things that do have truth value, insofar as they do exist, have meaning, right? And the meaning of the Trinity, at least in that sense, is found in the fact that it is explaining this inner life of the things that we find out about God in the church. At least for Aquinas, obviously, as being a Catholic, he finds that in the liturgy, he finds that in Mass, he finds that in the prayers, in the way that he, does the Vespers 7 times a day and so on and so forth. He lives the life of the Trinity, and all he has to do, since he already understands, the beauty of the Trinity in that respect, he understands the meaning of such, all he needs to do is just dispel the lack of being, the contradictions that arise with the Muslim objections. And so actually, historically, you'll see that the Muslims that do try to argue against Aquinas aren't as powerful in their argument, because the only reason they don't have to believe on the Trinity is their own dogmatism, right? They don't believe in the Trinity, but they don't have any reason to say that it's illogical per se or it contradicts absolute identity, rather that they just don't believe Muhammad taught it. And so now you have like these two groups at like an impasse almost, right? So I think that's interesting, actually.
Yeah. So that's right. I mean, so both groups believe what they believe authority, and then you might like we've got our beliefs here now. Now come at me. Like, show me that I believe something.
Right.
Contradictory. Then there's no discount my particular beliefs just because I believe them on authority. Right. The only reason to discount what I believe on authority is if you can show me that there's some sort of contradiction or inconsistency, but there isn't anything like that.
Right. Of course. And that's actually like what's more interesting. But okay. So, okay, fine. You have PIDs, you have PUDs, right? But obviously the first thing that if I was a Muslim or if I was an atheist or if I was just anyone that was like a Unitarian, I just rejected the doctrine of the Trinity, the first thing I'm going to try to do is find an internal inconsistency with the system and then appeal to explosion, right? That's the first thing I'm going to try and do. So let's say, for example, okay, you give an analogy in your book, in your paper, you give an actual, argument, a syllogism that demonstrates how someone might object to this. You say, okay, let's say, for example, that the Father is God, right? God is the omnipotent being, and the omnipotent being can beget, right? Therefore, the Father can beget, right? But we can also do the same argument with the Son, and thus that would mean that the Son would have to beget also, right? So, in fact, I will read out the premises of the argument if that's okay with you, right? You say here, pardon?
This is inspired by Aquinas. So Aquinas introduces this objection.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Aquinas introduces this objection. And what I do is take Aquinas's response to this objection and show that he is using the same mechanism that I introduced about opaque context earlier.
Right. That's interesting. Wow.
I'm trying to do what Aquinas is doing using modern terminology, basically. That he didn't have at that time, and so he did as best as was available at that time.
Right, makes sense. Yeah,
given,
makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So the argument, obviously, like if we take it from his objections, because obviously this is in his objections in the article, he says the Father is God. Argument number one is the Father is God. God is the omnipotent being, so that means that the Father is the omnipotent being. The omnipotent being can generate, therefore the Father can generate. But we can just switch out the PIDs with the Son, right? So we can say that the Son is God. God is the omnipotent being. The omnipotent being is the Son, right? Now the omnipotent being can generate, therefore the Son can generate, right? So how do we still apply opaque context? Is there something missing in the argument that doesn't follow? How do we dispel that from happening?
Yeah, there is something that's missing. So we've got the Father is the omnipotent being. So like the Father equals omnipotent being, right? So we've got an equal there. And then, so like let's like move that down, right? So in the Lois Lane example, we had the equal statement in the middle. So let's do that. So the Father is identical to the omnipotent being, right? There's only one. There's all-powerful God. The Father is that, right?
Right.
The Father can generate, right? That the Father does. It generates.
Right. Because he's just paternity itself, right?
Oh, sorry. No, sorry. I messed this up, right? So let's do this again.
Sorry. We're here with you. We're here for you. Okay, we're here for you.
The Father is the omnipotent being.
Mm-hmm.
The omnipotent being can generate, right? So we've got the omnipotent being here can generate.
Right. So the opaque context would be the can generate part.
Everything. So one of the things you can do is generate, right?
Right.
Is the omnipotent being. The omnipotent being can generate. So the Father can generate. You'd think that would follow, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, PIDs.
You think so. You think you could substitute into there.
Right,
Aquinas says you can't.
Right.
But
why not?
And the reason, yeah, okay. So the reason has to do with PIDs, as you mentioned. So PIDs are person-involved descriptions. And what that means is it's any description that has to do with a person. Or has its basis in a divine person.
Right.
So the Father is that. The Father is a description that has its basis in the divine person, and can generate also has its basis in a divine person. Like that's a divine, the Father kind of thing.
Right.
And so when you have the omnipotent being can generate, the omnipotent being can generate. The omnipotent being here is described by generating,
which is a PID.
Can generate.
Yeah.
So the can generate describes the omnipotent being. Right? Okay, and then down here you have the Father is, that's another P, and then you have the is the omnipotent being. So what you're trying to take, your PID then person uninvolved description here, and then PID and person uninvolved description here.
Yeah.
So what you're trying to do, you're trying to take two person involved descriptions, identify them with the person uninvolved description, and then substitute into it.
Which you can't do.
That's a true value.
Right.
So anything that goes next to a PID is going to be some sort of opaque context.
And
so
that makes sense.
Cloud around, and there's a cloud around the omnipotent being in this one. So the Father is the omnipotent being. There's a cloud around that, and then the omnipotent being can generate. So the omnipotent being, there's a cloud around the omnipotent being when it's around can generate. So the very fact that person involved descriptions can generate and the Father is creates these cloudy contexts that you can't substitute into and guarantee the same truth value.
Right. And that's solved by the way that like you actually give rules in the paper for like how PIDs and PUDs can work together. So you say that PUDs can be substituted for other PUDs and PIDs can be substituted for other PIDs, if I'm correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Right. But you can't do it one with the other. So you can't take a PUD and then swap it with a PID and think that you're going to get the same conclusion. It's not going to follow.
Yeah.
Right.
So let me here. So we've got the Father equals God and the Son equals God. Remember, that was like our initial argument, right? So you think you like fold into it, you collapse with the substitution, so the Father equals the Son. The reason you can't do that is the Father is a person, and so it creates an opaque context around God. The Father is God. So there's a cloud around God. And then the Son is God. There's a cloud around that. And so you're trying to take one person involved description and substitute it into God to kind of fold these around each other, collapse them around each other to make them equal each other. You can't do that because they're the clouds, shadows, or whatever.
Right.
So you can't do that. And the same thing is true in this argument that Aquinas was giving, right? So the Father is the omnipotent being. The omnipotent being can generate. So there's a cloud around the omnipotent being in both of them, and so you can't substitute into that cloud.
Yeah, right. Guys, make sure you keep liking the content as well. Make sure you tell a friend, because this stuff is absolutely amazing. Again, like this guy's breaking down basically everything that we have to do. And the thing is, what's interesting as well is that he's taken a new approach that I haven't really seen before, except by maybe Rob Coons, maybe, because he has a paper about like qua relations. So he talks about like God as the Father, or God as the Son, or God as the Spirit. It takes a one-self view of the Trinity. But you don't really talk about that in your paper. But you do reference it in a footnote, though. Is there a place that you see for people like Rob Coons who take that interpretation, or is he just going to end up with modalism? What do you think?
No. I don't think he's going to end up with modalism. I think the problem there is he has to distinguish between two different kinds of identity relations. Right. And I only have one, absolute identity. He has absolute identity.
Right.
And like so to solve the problem.
So he has absolute and pure and relative impure.
Yeah.
So, right, that's an issue, right?
So all these problems can always be distinguished by saying, well, when we say the Father is God, what we really mean is not absolute identity. We mean some other kind of identity. And this kind of identity like changes the kind of inference we make.
Right. Makes sense.
Real identity. So you can always do something like that. Numerical strategy too. Like, well, the Father, when we say the Father is God, we don't mean identity. We mean like is numerically the same as, right? And so
right.
Like doesn't always have these same rules as identity does. Then what's like different about my account is that I say you can have identity, just when you add these opaque contexts, now you can't do the substitute.
Right.
What those terms mean, I think there is absolute identity.
That's absolutely beautiful. Honestly, like I wish I had my soundboard up right now, but I'm gonna try and get it up. But this is Really, really good, you know. So you actually like again, and the way that you conclude the paper is, I think, is pretty bold. You're saying, look, I'm proposing a model that not only I think in itself will just dispel the contradictions, have classical identity, and so you can go on and start using other things in logic and so on. But what's more important is that you say that it might be possible that someone else can come build on the work and actually, you know, synthesize it with another model that either is already out there or a model that doesn't exist yet. So I think that's actually really courageous of you when it comes to like allowing that openness for people to actually not necessarily want to run away from classic identity, but actually embrace it and embrace the fact that identity itself, even under classical logic, will be either relativized to some degree, or I shouldn't even use the word relativized, but should be contextualized under certain instances so that we can still, you know, keep with sense. Because ultimately, what we're trying to do with identity is make sense of what it is to be a thing. Ultimately, you know. But
Yeah.
Yeah, go on. Yeah,
No, that's right. That's right. Yep. And
yeah.
yeah, just I mean, I have a couple things, uh, to kind of wrap up. I think I didn't address based on what you said and someone in the chat asked
Right,
earlier.
right.
You mind if I say a couple things here?
Absolutely. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm listen. I'm
Yeah.
here.
So,
I'm just here. I don't even mind.
so,
So what's needed?
so here, remember I said you can't substitute into the clouds,
Right,
like
right.
or into the shadows or whatever. Like
Mm-hmm.
when you collapse in that way, because
Mm-hmm.
when you got a person here or a description based on the person, it introduces the opaque context, which is a cloud. And every time you substitute into that, you can't expect the same truth value. There
Mm-hmm.
is an exception, and you mentioned that a little bit earlier. So if you have an involved description and then you create a cloud, it's going to create a cloud over here.
Mm-hmm.
You can have that, and there's some cases in which you can substitute into that cloud. The case in which you do it is that if you have two non-clouds down here. So
I see. Right, right.
yeah, so anytime you've got clouds, you can't collapse two clouds. You can substitute into one cloud though. I mean that's a
Right,
way of
right,
thinking
right.
about it.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
you can't. So here's what you can't do. The Father is identical to God. There's a cloud over the term God here. The
Mm-hmm.
Son is identical to God. There's a cloud over God here. You
Mm-hmm.
can't do that. You can't do that substituting and expect the same truth value. Now,
Mm-hmm.
the Father is identical to the omnipotent being.
Mm.
The omnipotent being is the all-knowing being. There's no clouds there, right? There's
Right,
no
right,
person
right, right.
there. So now you can substitute the Father. You can conclude that the Father is identical to the all-knowing being,
Okay,
right?
yeah, that is really cool. That's actually really, really cool. But you know, I did ask you a question. I asked this privately as well. We still got some time left, but I do want
Yeah.
to ask you about, and I think this is something that's really important. I want to ask you about quotations, just an introduction quickly on what quotations are and how they can help bolster our understanding, because this is a semantic issue and a semiotic issue of like signification and with the things that were signification that exist in reality as well. So, what are quotations in the field of semantics, and what can we use quotations for in application to Trinitarian thought?
Oh, okay. Well,
I apologize. Jen, I know. It was a very pesky question. And I know that so many people like have pesky views on this, but I just want to know your opinion on like quotations and how people should approach them, honestly, because I know nothing about
yeah.
them. So,
In general, quotations are just meant to set aside terms from what what those terms are meant to refer to,
hmm.
right? So, is it true that blue contains the letter B? Well,
The word
the
blue,
term contains the letter B,
right?
but blue, the color, right? So the thing that's referred to does not contain the letter B.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you'll hear people, well, life is just a word anyway. Well, no, it's not. life is a word, but life isn't. That's
Right.
the function of quotation, is
Okay.
to distinguish the term that's supposed to symbolize the thing
The thing
and
that's
the thing symbolized.
right. That's interesting. So like the term the father, obviously, like let's say the father is a term like the father, but like what the father signifies is just the relation in the Trinity that signifies paternity itself. As Aquinas would say, I think in the Summa and in the Contra Gentiles. That is so interesting, you know. Now again, I don't want to keep you for too long. Obviously, we agreed for an hour, but if you do want to plug anything at all, okay, if you want to show your website, he does have a website, by the way. Please, guys, go and just check out his website. He's got so much work. Okay, he's delved into so many different little topics and niches that I found really interesting to read up on. So yeah, would you like to give a link to your website, Chris?
Yeah, sure. It's just christweet.com. Yeah, I created it as a grad student,
Nice.
to like basically share my work,
Mm.
especially as I went on the job market, and I've just kept it going since.
Nice.
The are not up to date. I'm teaching new classes in the fall,
Mm.
but my research is, in a lot of cases, I'm not able to share the final published version of my work on my website because there are copyright issues. But almost always, people are able to share the penultimate version, so
Mm.
like the one
Mm.
just before publication, the
Right.
pre-published version. But
Well,
once, like, when you submit to get accepted,
mm.
you can submit that, and then they give you page proofs where you do all the new formatting. Once you get to that stage, you can't share
You
anything after
can't share
that.
anymore. Right. So it'll still have like kind of the content there, but just not like the nice way that's like really patterned out and smooth and the final edits and stuff. Honestly, you don't understand, man. This blows my mind. Honestly, doing a stream like this was really fun to do, as well as really informative. The people loved it as well. We have people on other applications as well that like love the stuff that you're doing. Okay, Chris, so you are not alone. Feel free to come back anytime. We'll feature you on stream again. It'll be great to just like talk about philosophy and theology, man. Honestly, this was fantastic. I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you. So this is an article, just in the chat. This is an
Mhm.
article, not a book, just an article. Although it is kind of
It's not a book, guys. It's not a book. I don't know how much I have to say this. It's not a book. It's an article. Okay. This man right
yeah.
here is just very good at what he does. That's not our fault. But I think it's good to conclude that actually this should be in terms of, because contextually the reason why I found this really interesting is because at least for us lower guys down here are pseudo apologists. I'm not an apologist. I'm just a guy that talks about theology sometimes. But for us people that discuss theology and these matters, there is this thing that was going around, obviously, as well as in academia, like the LPT, logical problem of the Trinity. And a lot of Muslims recently, for the past, let's say, year and a bit, were like, really championing this around and saying, aha, we have found the logical problem with Christianity. And almost as if like a gift from God, your paper just stumbled across my feed. And I said, absolute identity in the Trinity. Okay, let me read that. And that's it. And that's how we ended up here. And it seems to be that genuinely, might I say this, that your solution, although in practice isn't that big of a reach, is probably one of the most intuitive contributions that we've had to the space in a long time. And the fact that even Cambridge recognized this when their edition for their book, when they included your paper in the book, which, by the way, congratulations. Okay, congratulations for getting sent to getting published by Cambridge. But the fact that they include you, I think it's implicit, at least over here in the UK, that they see the logical problem of the Trinity not as a logical problem, but more so as a problem of articulation, if anything else. Because actually, like, the logic of it doesn't seem to be an issue at all. And I don't even think philosophers and scholarship are really championing this as, oh, this is a problem. I think that pretty much people are done with it now. So is what I've said pretty accurate to how scholarship feels, or how accurate to how some people in scholarship feel? I don't know. Just asking.
Yeah, it's hard to say what constitutes a problem. I mean, is something a problem if it's already solved? I mean, maybe,
Wow.
right?
What you said was really cool. Yeah.
Then you think it's a problem, right?
Right.
Yeah. So like I think I might even call it I say it's true. They're charged with two contradictions. It's like pragmatic arguments for Trinitarianism. And I think it is something that Trinitarians need to try to wrestle with in order to try to figure out the solution to these problems so they can avoid contradiction. I think that's really important. So I do call them that. And there definitely are philosophers who think that that there is still a logical problem that has not yet been solved. I'm not one of them.
Right. Amen. And that's, I mean, honestly, like that's really interesting, man. That's really interesting. So like to recap, it is more so an issue with your argument. If I want to call it if it's the logical problem of the Trinity, I want to see if we can dub it the term the solution of opaque contexts, right? The SOC, if you will, the SOC.
Opaque context solution. I think I like that a little better. OCS, opaque context solution.
Yeah, OCS, right? The OCS, a great solution, keeps the classical identity, as well as actually showing that we don't have identity figured out. One of my always biggest contributions in discussion is the fact that we don't have an agreed upon way that we fully encapsulate identity. Time as well as possible worlds is a really big problem for us when we do talk about identity as well, especially us classical logicians as well. And when we do, talk about these things, if we can't even solve it on a temporal level, on a finite created level, how much more an infinite or uncreated level, an atemporal level, right? I think honestly, it would be a bit of an assumption, a presupposition, or if I might use the term, it might be a bit ad hoc, even in their case, to say that, we can, work out, we can apply identity in such a way. Did I freeze? I froze? I'm not frozen. I'm fine. Am I frozen?
You're fine now.
Okay. Amen. Oh, apologies. But like, again, like the point is basically like, obviously if we can't work out identity just within time, how are we going to extrapolate that outside of time without us just assuming that identity is not going to have this problem, right? We don't have an argument for that apart from it's convenient. But I honestly, once again, thank you so much, guys. Please go and follow Chris Tweet in anywhere he is, okay? Make sure you show him as much love as you can. If you have a Twitter, make sure you follow him on Twitter as well. Do you have Twitter, Chris? Or no?
I stopped Twitter like years and years ago.
Oh, thank God.
I'm on Facebook and Instagram, but that's about it.
No, okay. Right. You wanna plug your Instagram, or is it like a private thing for you? It's not really too much, but yeah, thank you so much, guys. Honestly, okay, we don't want to keep Chris too long here, but honestly, we enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed it. Okay, the many of us that were in chat enjoyed it as well. We appreciate you so much. God bless you, bro. And yeah, man, just take care, man, and hopefully we'll see you sometime soon. Goodbye.
Yep.
Right. Just to clarify again, this response to the LPT is not a model. And the reason why it's not a model is, as Chris clarifies in the paper, and I made a slip up in the original stream, he wants to use this information to bolster other models. He's simply explaining how you can have this with classical identity and classical logic whilst applying the idea of opacity to it. Thank you so much, guys, for watching that video. If you did enjoy the video, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications so that you can see the next time that we upload. We do hope that you may stay tuned for a part 2 that will be out next week if future Sig does it. So please make sure you get at that. God bless and have a better day than me.